Do you have the... Yeah, you can call me Maddie. All right, we should be live. So if you're in the YouTube chat, I see we have 6 viewers. Let us know if you can hear and see everything okay. We got SmithyQ back again. And this time, Jonathan, I was prepared. I put a link to your Chessable course in the description. So I'll be mentioning that every 15 minutes. I have a timer set. Yes. Yeah, it'd be very interesting to see. I hope some people play it. Smithy is muted. Oh, Smithy is muted. That's not good. Why is Smithy muted? Why is Smithy muted? Yes. Wait, let's try something. If you mute yourself on Zoom and unmute on Discord. No. I can hear you, but it's very echoey. In the chat, how does it sound? Can I don't think they can hear you still. I think you're right, actually. Let me try to, I could try switching. You say something again?
Hi, everyone. Wonderful world of Smithy. Life is good. Chess is having fun. Big event.
I think they can hear you now.
Oh, yeah?
Everyone's saying
oh,
yeah.
wonderful. Okay. I think.
That just,
I'm not sure.
that just means I'm taking my headphones out. See,
Okay.
That's audio skills right there. Just click a few buttons, remove some headphones, and hope for the best.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to start kicking off these matches. I have players. I'm going to be throwing the commands in chess.com.
Excellent.
So for those
Good luck,
of you,
everyone.
For those of you that haven't watched one of these before, it's a 30 plus 30 team match. We got Presta J and Combinaro on board 1. Presta J is playing white, and above our heads in the live stream, you can see the scoreboard. So everyone on the left is Team Presta J. Everyone on the right above SmithyQ's head is Team Boogie.
Ooh.
They were going to be called Team Boogie Knights. Then I shortened it to Boogie.
Okay. Easier to say.
Yeah, it is. Trey is not on still. So that's on board 3.
Okay.
And Squid is not online on board 4.
Okay. Oh, we got some opening prep so far. Board one. I think this is straight out of your course, Matt.
Yes, this is the Tartakower variation. This like straight out of the chess goals repertoire from the black side. What do you know about the Tartakower?
I know that for the longest time, it was not considered a very serious option. And it was with really modern engines have shown some really interesting ideas, especially with it's where black advances h5, h4, even when he castles kingside. Like that was something you just never thought back in the 1950s, 1960s. Yeah, exactly. The old Harry push. But it's there we go, right? But it's surprisingly effective, much more effective than you might normally think. And all the pawns around black's king, it makes it surprisingly hard for an attack to succeed. So this is one of the openings that's really, I guess you could say, has found brand new life in the modern era.
Yeah, and I think this is something that I discovered because I've played the caro-kann since I was probably like 12 years old, on and off, right? Like it's been a couple decades. And back when I used to play the caro-kann, I don't remember really anyone playing the Tartakower. It was just doubled pawns. It seemed kind of
Mm.
dry. And I think the general consensus was that white's just a little bit better with the pawn structure. Um, but then
Yeah,
I've started looking at modern chess and like looking at stockfish evals, and it actually scores well, and the computer likes it.
yeah, I think it's really easy. And honestly, my first thought when I just look at the pawn structure, it looks like a Spanish exchange in the Roy Lopez, but where white still has the two bishops. And so how on earth can this be a good structure for black? But it's when you have to you dig in deeper into some of the middle game plans. It's not easy just exchanging all the pieces and then get to a winning endgame. It's uh, far from that.
And a lot of times I find for white, they reach this position where they feel they should be better, maybe with the D and the C pawns, but it's not easy to advance either one. Then before you know it, black's the one like pushing the F pawn up the board, and there's a bunch of pressure on white.
Mm.
So I think it kind of it goes both ways. Like it can be tough to play for white, but it can also be tough to play for black. And
Oh
that's
yeah.
kind of the beauty of it. Like if you're really well versed in the middle game plans from either side, I think it gives a lot of chance to just outplay the opponent and kind of really make them look uncomfortable throughout the game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at this knight on G3.
Yep.
So he's got to be Presta J's got to be thinking now. Can I? Well, first of all, can I just grab this pawn? You know, if it stays here, oh, it's black's move. Okay, so H4, I'm guessing, or G6.
Do you ever play G6 in your course, Matt? Because that I just look at that bishop takes G6 follow up.
Yeah, we always put the knight on F8 first. So I think you're
Mm-hmm.
right. If G6 immediately, bishop takes G6, pawn takes, and the queen comes in.
Yeah, you're immediately getting 3 pawns for the piece. You get the initiative. You can castle queenside. Um, I mean, you need to calculate it, but that's one of those I'd play that very quickly.
Yeah, I think black's in big trouble there. You're right. So we would need so probably H4 here. It might be
Yeah.
forced. But then the knight gets this nice square at
Mm-hmm.
F5. I'd still like bishop or knight F8, but I don't really want to lose the bishop. I don't want that knight capturing. I kind of like white's position actually. Like even though this is in our course, feels like black's a little bit shaky here. What do you think?
I don't know if I've ever played a game in this position in his actual opening, so I'm going to defer to your judgment. I do. Knight F5 is coming. So,
I see Boogie is in the Discord chat. Posed my position already, forgot to play H5 in critical line. Remembered right after releasing the mouse H4.
Okay.
So back here, I think he's saying H4.
Before Knight G3.
for knight d yeah, instead of knight
Yeah.
d7. Yeah, right. Because knight g3 is just such a good square for the knight.
Hmm.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm gonna work on trying to get these other games kicked off still.
Okay.
Let's move to Mad Luck against Squid. So this is board number 4. Squid is on Team Presta J, Mad Luck is on Team Boogie. This was a Nimzo Indian defense. Queen c2.
Classical variation.
Mm-hmm. And knight f3. So this isn't directly from the ChessGoals d4 course. We don't start with queen c2, but we might see similar structures. Do you play Nimzo for either color?
Oh, I love the Nimzo for black. Uh, I don't allow it as white. It seems as if the Nimzo is just that perfect opening in the sense that it's not symmetrical. Very early on, there's going to be imbalances, bishop for knight, knights against bishops, closed center versus trying to keep it closed versus one side trying to open it. Black has a near million ways he can play, right? With b6 and bishop b7, with or without c5. You can play d6 and e5 structures. It just seems as if black has so much incredible flexibility. It's a lot of fun to play. And I really love that flexibility from the black side. At the same time, it's easy to fall in love with all the different plans, and then white just plumps in e4, d4, claims a huge share of the center, and then you're worse.
Yeah, it's one of those openings where it's like, again, you're kind of on this balance, right? Where like if everything goes black's way, I love the positions for black in the Nimzo. Like they just control the right squares, they're just at the right time, and they very easily equalize. So like when you're looking at the Nimzo with an engine, that's almost how I feel. Like I feel the computers just kind of think it's equal. Um, but I tried playing the Nimzo for a short part of my chess career, and I was getting those positions like you said, where white would get like E4, D4, and C4, massive center, and I'm like, okay, something just went wrong, and now I'm completely busted. My position's terrible. So it's actually kind of hard to play, but if you know it well, it's super effective. Now we
Yeah,
see D5.
so this is it's almost a Ragozone. The Ragozin? Ragozin.
Ragozin, Ragozin, I don't know.
Yeah. It's why can't they be called the Smith variation?
Yes.
Right. So for the longest time, I did not like playing with the d5s, just because it seemed like it's more of a queen's gambit structure at that point. And if you wanted to play a queen's gambit, why don't you start with one d5, that sort of thing. However, black can still open things up very quickly with a very fast c5 and then exchange all the center pawns. And what we notice is white is still 3 moves away from castling. Black has castled. And so that's kind of the dynamic that black is often going for. And I found natural moves by white can be a problem, but this is simply an exchange. How will he recapture?
I think pawn takes, right?
So I maybe this is just because I hate symmetry. I've always liked taking the queen in this situation.
Interesting. Okay.
And then you play b6 and bishop b7. We're going to give up the bishop for the knight anyway, so we don't really care. And it's more fun than just taking the pure symmetry.
Right, because if you take with the e-pawn, then you're going into that queen's gambit decline structure. And that's something where I think it's kind of easy to play for white. It's sort of like our Caro exchange in reverse, same pawn structure where you can just
Yep.
bring that bishop out, e3, bishop d3. All the moves flow for white. Yeah, queen takes d5 would be very interesting to see just that dynamic. And then black is getting the light square control in the center. Because like you mentioned, these two pieces are going to trade off. And it's kind of up to white to figure out, can I help this e-pawn get up to e4? If not, I think black has a great position. All right, let's move to our third board. So we have now Sea Panzer against Cynical. I'm going to call him Sea Pank. Sea Pank is on Presta J's team, and Cynical is on Team Boogie. And this came out of a semi-Slav defense main line. Slav move order to begin with. This game is just super solid by both players. I mean, all of that looks pretty standard. What do you think of this position?
So I know that the bishop e2 line was recommended by Sam Shanklin in his lifetime repertoire series for d4. And he has some interesting ideas here. I don't fully remember them off the top of my head, but the idea is trying to make it really hard for Black to put his queen somewhere. So if Black puts his queen on the C file, we're going to put our rook onto the C file and we're just going to annoy it. Same thing, if the queen goes to the E7, we're going to move the bishop out of the way. And then there's always the threat of, just the rook staring at it. And if the queen stays on D8, he had this really funny idea of playing rook to C1, rook to C2, and then rook to D2, and then preparing one of the central breaks.
I like this.
Yeah, and Black, he runs, Black can run out of waiting moves. Okay, he's got bishop b7, rook to c8, maybe he'll play h6, but White can play all sorts of an infinite number of waiting moves, waiting for Black to say, here's where I'm going to put my queen, and then we try and play against that. So that's the Shanklin, in a nutshell, the Shanklin plan.
That's really cool. So we're kind of taking advantage of the fact that Black just has slightly less space than White. It's a little bit tougher to find a square for the queen. That makes me wonder, does Black have time to play c5? You know, if you give Black enough waiting moves, can they get c5 in and try to equalize on space? Or are there potential issues with maybe like knight b5 trying to take advantage of that?
Yeah, so definitely Black wants to get in one of the breaks, c5 or e5. And if I remember correctly, Black can get c5 in if he prepares it properly, but then he's going to get the hanging pawn structure and it's even. But if Black isn't accurate, White can put more and more pressure on the hanging pawns, and White has a near perfect position to fight against that. That's what Shanklin argues, at least. Now, at the same time, Sam Shanklin has released a semi-Slav course where he says that Black is completely fine. And so I think it comes down to one of those positions where it's computer equal, but it might be easier for one side to play. We'll see. It depends how comfortable you are with the hanging pawns. Or if Black tries to play e5, then there could be an exchange on the with the e pawn, exchange on the d5, and then he might be left with an isolated pawn. And then there's another potential structure. Again, it's probably equal, but I find it's often easier to play against the isolated pawn, especially when Black has it.
I agree. And then, like you said, White's pieces do seem well set up to play against any sort of pawn weaknesses. So for the viewers, if you aren't sure what hanging pawns are, that's 2 pawns in the center, and these pawns on the side are gone. So it's like 2 pawns on half open files. Pawns from the sides can't protect them. And then the isolated pawn is just 1 pawn out there by itself, and there would be no pawns on the adjacent files. So if Black gets in one of these pawn breaks and White gets to choose the capture first, there's a good chance that Black will end up with a potential pawn weakness, even though it might still be dynamically balanced. Like maybe Black gets that extra space that they've been craving in return for that pawn weakness.
Yeah, it's a pretty subtle position.
So we still have one game that hasn't started. I'll see if anyone wants to substitute.
Yeah, so I've played this position in my blitz games a few times. And the other thing is that it's also nice, or the downside to this approach is, bishop goes to d3, is that we could have put the bishop there on the back on move, what, 5 or about move 6? But if you play bishop to d3 there, according to Shankland, then black can go into the open Moran by taking on c4, and then you have to recapture because the bishop's actually hanging. When you put the bishop on e2, you don't have to recapture right away. We can actually play a plan with a4, and then you go knight to d2 to take on c4, and that will harass a bishop if it ever goes to d6. Yeah, so that means the bishop really has to go on e7, and black's a bit more passive. On e7, he can't fight for the e5 break, say. So this is a move order to stop that open Moran, which is a very complex, highly theoretical. But the downside is 5 moves later, you have to spend a tempo to put the bishop on d3 if you're trying to fight for e4. And that appears to be what white is doing here, because he's got all of his minor pieces. He's got his rook. He's going to go for e4 next.
So it sounds like Cynical really knows his lines. I mean, that's super interesting. Uh, really interesting move order subtlety. I didn't realize that. The only kind of semi-Slav structure that I played from the white side was the Boris Avruk repertoire. And that
Oh,
one we
yes.
have the c3 knight would be on d2.
Mm-hmm.
This bishop would be here. And the idea was to try to kind of clog up the e5 square quickly with the help of this b2 bishop supporting it. So I haven't
Yeah.
really studied this structure before, but that's really interesting. So I think we're going to get a big strategic battle here. Just like you talked about, it looks like there's going to be a few waiting moves. And eventually one side has to break, like maybe e4 for white after they get the rook on c1.
Yeah, you can only wait for so long before your advantage just slips, right? White
Yeah.
has the first move advantage, but he has to do something with it. If you just spend your entire time waiting, well, eventually the other side's going to catch up. Yeah, I really like these types of positions.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one. I think this will be a really rich middle game. Okay, let's go back to board number 1, the press to J game. Wow, we've had a lot of action here. We've had,
That's a
okay, there was a 6-minute think to play knight f8. It's a straight pawn sacrifice.
okay.
Now we see g6 f5, and f4 is threatened with the e3 bishop pinned, and it's also a fork. Knight e2 was played. Wow, what do you think of this decision by black? Sacking the h-pawn, but all of a sudden the initiative is completely in black's favor.
That seemed a lot better than any attempts, or than allowing the knight to sit on f5. Just intuitively, this is a lot easier for black to play.
And the pawn that
Yeah.
he lost was the h-pawn. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not the end of the world. There's a lot of play here for black. We see bishop d2, bishop g4, utilizing this pin and making it very difficult for white to try to get castled. Oh, sorry
Whoops.
about that. So white plays f3. Very committal move, opening up this diagonal. And
How
black
long did
goes
white
for
spend on f3?
5.9 seconds.
Very okay.
Yeah, that seems pretty fast. But maybe he was ready for it. Queen h4 check. King f1. I mean, to me, this feels like long-term pressure for black. This
Oh yeah.
king on g8 is completely safe. Black's got 2 bishops still. This knight's going to eventually come back into the game. It's going to find a route. I'm liking black again. I mean, picture this knight getting to g3 even.
Yeah.
It'll take a while, but
Give
him like 8
we can
moves.
picture it.
Yeah. Jeremy Silman fantasy position. Just put that knight on g3. So then bishop e1 was played. Getting the queen.
Right. H5.
h4 and g5.
This is incredible. Oh, I love this. Now, so g5, it does just white's rook now is going to be active. It gives the g6 square for the knight. I guess the h-pawn is pinned currently, so we can't take on g5. Oh, we just got moves. They just keep coming.
Oh, this is a nice positional move because I wanted to play king g1, but I think g4 is the issue. g4, and then these pawns are all getting traded. Bishop f5. Look at that control of the light squares. And I think king g1 is an eventual plan, threatening
Yep.
h takes g.
Oh.
I like this move a lot
Yeah.
because black really does not want to trade off that bishop.
It ties that knight down to f8. The knight can't move because it's protecting the bishop.
Yeah. I would almost like to put a piece on e6. I don't know if the exchange sack would be good here. Probably not. Knight e6.
Mm.
But the benefit of this is if we are in this just super tactical position, maybe black would rather keep the knight on and say, okay, I will trade off one rook for your active
Mm.
bishop, bring the other rook in, and then quickly get this knight into the game. Exchange sack might not be terrible here, but white also doesn't have to take it, so that's a little
Yeah,
uncomfortable for
I think
black.
that's the real issue. Would you take that, or would you just play bishop to g4? You always have the exchange sack in the cards. You can then play king g1, bishop f2, bring your queen's rook over to e1. And white's already up a pawn, right?
Right.
So white doesn't need to go necessarily material grabbing.
Oh, it won't let me. Okay.
It won't let you put some moves on the board. Maybe they're really bad moves. I don't know.
I'm wondering here if maybe I could play queen h8. I'm trying to force you to take my rook. And the idea is rook h6 next. Maybe I can drop that queen back, bring the rook over. Knight e6 is probably just better, though.
Or could the intuitive move that I'm trying to make work would be c5,
Oh,
because opening the position up, because then when we bring a rook over to d8, it's not hitting the d4 pawn. If our bishop can land on c5, that's a huge improvement, and it's lancing down towards the king. And maybe even in a dream scenario, a bishop to c6 or b5 as well.
okay. So let's say c5. I'd like to play bishop takes bishop, and
Knight
then queen
recaptures.
f5. And
Sitting g5 and the knight, eh?
mhm.
Yeah.
And if black takes on d4, I'm thinking take with the pawn. Oh, but there could be rook takes. There could be rook takes d2 ideas if the queen's on f5 for white. Oh, that's interesting. To go to c4 or d5.
Hmm.
And I wonder if bishop takes bishop, maybe black wants to take with the f pawn and play e5, knowing that this king is stuck in the middle.
Hmm.
Because if
Well,
bishop takes, rook takes, I still really do like queen f5.
yeah, queen a5 is nice. But if bishop takes, pawn takes, just king g1.
Right, and then there's no pin on the
Yeah, because
pawn.
then we can take on g5, and then even bishop to h4 afterwards, where the bishop suddenly becomes really active.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so bishop takes, pawn takes, king g1. e5 is pretty slow. And it's opening up the light squares. Like maybe the queen just sinks in here later.
Mm.
Okay, so now I'm thinking bishop takes, rook takes is maybe the plan. With the idea of doubling rooks and this d2 knight is loose.
And that knight doesn't have a really good square, because if we do the king g1 plan, well, then it would have to go back to c1 if we double.
Right, all of these squares are covered except c1.
Mm-hmm.
I also like the rook on e6 because of these rook lift ideas where you swing it over g6 or h6. Like king g1 can actually be met. by rook
Mm.
h6 to not allow white to take. Oh, I see in the chat, Bob says, "Down with SmithyQ censorship." That was probably like 20 minutes ago.
Okay.
Christina says, "Maddie J," and I see Mo in the chat. How are you doing, Mo? I don't think
I
we have a sub, unfortunately, for Trey. We may just have to cancel that game and have a 3-game match.
I will say, looking at this position, I am shocked from when, if you go back to move, I guess 11, where black sacrificed the H pawn. Yeah, and then white took it. That black got so much play just by advancing those pawns. Like, to me, that's almost incredible.
I wonder, in hindsight, I wonder if oh, there is no knight f4. I'm sorry. I was
No,
thinking knight
yeah.
f4, but it just captured. Yeah, that was a great decision by black, I think, to sack that pawn.
Even if it was a move order slip, it's certainly given us an interesting game, if nothing else.
Yeah. And now in the game, we do have a move on to c4. Oh, I don't know about c4.
Mm.
Because like we talked about, this white king is exposed. And these bishops really want to get on diagonals pointing towards the king. So each time a pawn moves forward, it's a potential weakness and something that black could maybe target. I mean, even a
Yeah.
move like b5.
You know what? I was looking at that.
Unless it's like a trick that white has set up. b5, now we take the bishop. But still, I don't really see any downside of b5 for black because it's just opening up light squares around the white king. But you know what I'm looking at? Are there any potential tactics where we just play g5 right away? If pawn takes, well, maybe it doesn't work. If pawn takes, I wanted bishop takes, but then queen takes. And there's not really anything to do with the black queen.
Mm.
Okay, so maybe it's not working. I was looking at lines. I was looking at lines where maybe we could do something where they take our queen and then we end up winning the bishop, but I don't think it's quite working.
So I guess we got to figure out what black's threat is. You really like that?
I kind of do. I mean, there's bishop c3 now, though. That could be part of the idea. Bishop c3 and white starting an attack. That's a nice diagonal.
It is. Now the c5 ideas for black don't make any sense.
Right. c5, d5.
Yeah, d5, bishop c3. We trade off the light squared bishops. All of our pawns are on light squares for our dark squared bishop. That's exactly what we want.
Oh,
Okay,
there's
we got
b5.
the b5. Yeah.
You know what amazes me a little bit? How fast these players are playing. Like, black's time management might be about what I would expect, but Presta J has 32 minutes. Started with 30, and we're 21 moves deep. Now, this is like the critical position, I think, of the game. These last 5 moves. Or actually, probably the last 10 moves, even, since the pawn sack.
Yeah, the having a time advantage is great as long as you remember to use it.
Yes.
Yeah. That's something that I struggled with when I moved from correspondence chess to live chess. There's a point where the opening stops and you have to actually, put some thought into it. And it's really easy to overestimate when that happens, right? Oh, I know the next few moves. This is all thematic. And then you get into a position like this.
Right. And I think that happens a lot when it's like you think of a position strategically, right? Like we go back to move 11, and I feel like it's kind of positional at this point. White's looking at these ideas, knight f5 and weak squares, and then all of a sudden it just turns into tactics. And that's when you really got to start thinking, how can I use my time effectively? Like, you don't want to burn 15 minutes out of your 30, but I feel a couple minutes a move is called for in these positions. So what do we do here? B5. Black is threatening, obviously. Bishop takes C4. I mean, do we play C5 here? Positionally, it doesn't seem like a great move, but it does shut down this bishop for a bit.
It it does. And then maybe knight c3 to e4. And then we've solved the one problem piece.
Hmm. Close up the center for a bit. Try to reroute the knight. Maybe we don't even take on E6. Uh, maybe it's better for black if we take on E6.
Yeah, because I
Just
think black would really like to have a different piece on e6, whether it's the rook to slide over or it's the knight just to get to a better square. Uh, and so we just keep the bishop on e6.
yeah, I'm trying to look for tactics for white, but I just keep
Mhm.
coming back to the more positional idea of C5. Something like B3, it feels too shaky for white. Like we're just
Yeah,
loosening the center and giving the B file to black with our king. Our king's on F1. So the issue for black with the king on F1, these rooks can just really never get connected. So if any files open up outside of the E file, that should favor black.
yeah, intuitively. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I was briefly looking at b3 and can white just claim the b file, but he can't because he's got a rook over on h1 that can't help. So we got the c5. Bishop e7 played very fast.
So one thing that this does for white, though, the knight sits pretty well all of a sudden on E2 because now F4 is not defended by that bishop. So if
Hmm.
black tries to take here, he has to at least calculate knight takes F4 ideas.
Yeah, I guess the bishop wants to go to f6.
Oh, and maybe this is a threat right away because if bishop takes, knight takes, and then the pawn's defended.
Mm. That's right. It's very easy to miss that taking. Yeah, the queen will now be hitting that.
But G4 is all, I mean, G4 might even be stronger. Knight takes, there's this hanging still. Okay, I like this move, bishop E7 for black. It's putting a tough question on white. What do you do against this threat of G4? And I think it's almost forcing white to take that bishop.
Yeah. So bishop takes, knight takes, king g1 finally. But then does g4 come? Yeah.
Yeah, and this pawn's defended. So maybe bishop takes, knight takes, bishop D2. But the problem is it feels very passive for white. Like you're
That is
just
very passive. Just rook d8, bishop f6, and now d4 is a weakness.
all right. So we need to play. I think we do need to play aggressive then for white. How do we do it?
Trying to get c3 and bishop at knight d4.
Yeah, I just giving that pawn back for activity.
I would like that a lot more if our king were not on f1.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, could we start with bishop c3? So one thing I'm wondering is if this bishop gets on c3 and white's able to push that pawn up to d5, whether it's a sack or not. Let's say we get some scenario where bishop lands here, g4 is played, and white ignores it. Maybe even allowing this trade. Could we reach a scenario where the black king is in just as much danger as the white king?
Hmm.
That's one thing I'm starting to wonder. Can white just play dynamically here? And if the position opens up, maybe they're doing okay. Now G4, maybe the king hides on F2, and if takes takes, all of a sudden the A1 rook is coming to G1, and it's black's rooks that aren't in the game. Oh, bishop back.
Hmm. Yeah. So obviously, bishop takes c6. It then forks the rooks. And so does black spend a tempo? I like rook c8 to stop that. Or can we just plow ahead with some sort of tactics now that we have the uncontested light squares, f5, g4, h3 now? g4, bishop takes c6, g takes f3. The bishop can always take that on f3 as well.
Yeah, that's nice. These guys are board one for a reason. Like they're playing really good chess. I criticize the time management, but these are good moves. I mean, every move it's like they're putting the question to their opponents. You know, they're
Yeah.
not just letting them have comfortable ideas.
Yeah, this is actually one of those positions where I think both players are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Black would far prefer not to be down a pawn and having to try to justify that. And white, okay, he's up a pawn. Yay, that's really happy, but I wish I would have castled a move earlier.
And we get away with bishop c4. Because like we talked about earlier, black
Yeah.
sort of wants the e6 square available. Either, you know, it's blocking the rook or it's blocking the knight. If bishop c4, I feel like that almost forces white to play bishop d3 at some point because of the pin on the d2 knight, in combination with the rook waiting on e8.
Yeah, I was just trying to justify it. So if white were to play b3, just trying to kick the bishop away, we're just going to take on e2. Then whatever recaptures, f5 is going to come, kick the bishop away, and then bishop e7 would move somewhere, exposing the rook.
Right. Oh, I like this move too. So this kind of goes back to the old theory, if you don't know what to do, just develop a piece. Like, that move was played in 2 minutes. Wait, he resigned. Oh no, mouse slip. He wanted rook c8.
Oh no.
I'm taking a peek at the eval bar. It's stuck.
Well, that's
So how bad is this? Bishop takes c6.
besides, I suppose, dropping a pawn
But I want
and the
this move.
exchange.
Yeah, I've been waiting to sack the exchange for a few moves.
You surely have. And then queen h8, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, this doesn't seem that bad.
Bishop. So the threat is bishop moves somewhere, and then we can take on e2.
Mm-hmm.
There's no piece can add more to e2 right now. There's no way to block it. Okay.
Yeah, it's a lot of pieces for a queen if black goes for
Yeah, bishop takes, pawn takes, cashing on e2. So we got a queen or rook versus, I don't even know.
I just feel it's a little too early to resign. I think black has the 2 bishops. I mean, he has 2 rooks or 2 bishops, the rook coming down the e file, knight ready to come into the game. Yeah, I would at least make white prove like, okay, show me you can connect your pieces and kind of get out of the dangers of having your king on f1, because right now I think black still has the initiative.
Yeah, it's a very rich position. This whole middle game position, starting from the sacrifice of the pawn, throwing those the king side pawns up, just really congesting white.
So Team Boogie takes the lead, 1.5 to half. I marked the just a draw on board 2.
Right, that makes sense.
Or actually, that should be board 3.
I've completely forgotten what all the other games are.
Let's check it out. All right, so this one we had the semi-Slav, and we left it around this position. Bishop d3
Yep.
was played, rook c8. Immediate e4 by white.
Yeah, that's what we said was likely to happen. And then it looks like black didn't just exchange on e4, on c4.
Does give white this really large center.
Yeah, so black has to respond with the pawn break right now, or he's going to get suffocated.
But now white has a protected passed pawn.
Yeah. And that bishop on b7 looks a little bit silly.
Mm-hmm. So e4, are you kind of... I'm thinking black should have taken on e4.
Yeah, because you mass exchange on e4, you bring your other knight to f6. Yeah, take, knight to f6, bishop goes back to c2 usually, and then you've got c5, getting our bishop open, and I think we control d5 enough. I think it's an equal position. I don't think either side is... Yeah. Certainly my intuitive reaction would be to take on e4. Don't let white have the center.
I think you're right, yeah. Because 3 pawns against 2, it really almost never turns out well because either of these pawn breaks, d5, almost always works for white if they want it, in terms of they're not going to lose any material. Okay, so after d takes c, b takes e5, we had the pawn push, trade, bishop to b4. Rook c1, knight c5. Okay, so black is getting active. That's good. And bishop takes c3. Okay. So I think black is trying to say that the position is closed up enough in the center, and there's this potential weakness long term with the 2 knights pointing at it, that it's okay to give up the bishop pair. But I really like the bishops for white, even though that b1 bishop isn't doing really anything at this point. Long term, it's going to be a good piece.
Yeah, okay. It's somewhat justified. I'm looking that most of black's pawns are on dark squares, but the knight was also pinned. We could have waited a move. We could have coerced a3 maybe, or maybe we could have used the pin somehow, prepare knight a4, which would hit the bishop, hits the knight. Maybe you can play queen d7 to prepare that. I don't know if that works actually, but...
Or even like bishop a6, try to work around the pawns.
But as is, okay. So he took, and then queen d7.
Oh, I think that was a pawn drop.
Whoops.
Yeah, this is uncomfortable, I think, having the e5 pawn attack like that. Maybe you almost have to play knight back to d7.
It's a shame because where you want to put that knight on d6.
Yeah.
But
like if you had time, pawn f6, right?
Right, yes.
Knight g4 doesn't work because of h3. And if you go back, you lose the pawn. Try knight d7 and bring the other knight to d6, but the problem is when the knights retreat, it really opens up lines for the bishops.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to do a positional concession, giving up the 2 bishops, and then start retreating your pieces. There has to be, there's something else. I hope queen d7 wasn't a mouse slip.
I haven't seen anything. Oh, we're getting more comments in the chat. Felipe just arrived. Hey, Felipe. Resta J is saying Matt's rigging the tournament. Oh. I just can't run the scoreboard, that's all.
Oh. It's hard. Multitasking is a very difficult thing.
Yeah. I need more practice. And then, let's see, we're talking about emojis in the chat. Where is the Rambo cat emoji? And then Felipe says, I don't know why, but I imagine SmithyQ different.
Okay. I'm going to take that in a very positive way.
I imagined you having less books in the background. That's a
I'm a
lot of
law student.
books. Oh, that's a good point, yeah. Yeah, I've been taking your advice, by the way, on the rotator cuff.
Oh, yes, is it working?
Yeah, I think so. I like every workout I just do, some of those sidestepping with the bands.
Right.
Seems
Can
to
you
help.
can you raise the hands again? Is there less pain?
It's less pain now, yeah. I can still feel it, some motions, but I think it helps a lot just kind of loosening it up each day.
Yeah, it takes forever, unfortunately. The smaller the muscle, the longer it takes to heal.
And the older you get too old and then it takes
I didn't say
forever.
anything about that.
All right, let's
So
go
it's been a
back.
long time since we looked at this. Oh, is this
Yeah.
game over?
No, this Nimzo.
Okay, sorry. I saw it said someone won by right. I guess that was a different game. Sorry.
Okay.
False alarm.
Oh, so we were back here actually. We were a ways back. We
Oh,
see
so we
knight.
were so there were three options of taking on d5. I was looking at queen. You were looking at pawn, and black played with the knight.
Yeah, Squid was looking at knight. I did it again. So knight takes. There are some openings like this for black when you have the white king stuck in the center, not quite ready to castle. It's sort of like a Grunfeld-esque way to play
Mm,
it. But I think the
or
issue here is after knight takes pawn takes, it hits the bishop. So black is losing a bit of time here.
yeah,
Whereas normally in this position, you would really like to just play c5 right away and say,
yeah.
okay, let me blow open the center while the white king's on e1. So this is a valuable tempo. So now
Oh,
c5 feels critical. Like you got to open that center up, open the dark squares.
this position just looks like, especially with black already castled, e5, knight g5 coming, bishop h7, just rook lift. And we can see, unfortunately, literally all of black's minor pieces are on the wrong side of the board. This does not look like a happy middle game for black from here.
Yeah, so that's something to keep in mind if you're watching in the chat. Um, when you give your opponent a big center like this, you really want to think about how can I fight against that center? And usually it's with a pawn. You can use your pieces to try to blockade the pawns from your opponent. But when it comes to the point where they already have the big center, usually you need a pawn to kind of punch back and get one of those pawns to either take or move forward. So in this case, black really needs to look for moves like e5 and c5. And like Jonathan said, I think here white should strongly, very strongly consider e5. I mean, if it's a blitz game, I'm probably not even thinking here. I'm just playing e5
Yeah.
because that just shuts down almost all the counterplay for black, and this king is really exposed. There's no knight over here to help out. None of the minor pieces can get over here. We see bishop f4, f6.
That's the right sort of idea, but now, oh, he's able to go through the center. Nice.
Yeah, and this h7 pawn. Oh, black does defend it. Interesting. So black's up a pawn here.
Guess he perhaps should have changed the move order there.
Yeah, maybe if you're going to go for this line, insert bishop takes h7.
Though at the same time, now with the center completely open and f6 being played, like there's some weak diagonals. I mean, it's not just a free pawn. Let's just say that way.
That's true. Yeah, white does have compensation. Okay, so the rooks trade off, rook e1. Black is still having a little bit of trouble getting this rook into the game.
Yep.
Queen c2 was played. But
I was trying to make something like queen d5 work and just get the back rank, but then there's queen g8 at the end. Yeah. It's like, whoopsie.
Well, queen sacks are my favorite thing. So there's got to be a way. I mean, maybe bishop f5.
There has to be a way to.
What about bishop f5? It's kind of hard to keep on the e8 square. Maybe queen d8, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because if you're white, I guess you really like the queen here, blocking in the bishop.
Yeah, let's not make him, let's not try and trade our bishop
Mhm.
on c8. No, let's not do that.
You know what I like here? So queen c2 was played in the game, lining up queen and bishop on h7. But my feeling is we actually want the queen in front of the bishop. So I would rather see that bishop drop back
Get back to b1, yeah.
or queen c4, queen e4. I really want the queen in front of the bishop. I think that's the way that you can provoke more pawn weaknesses, like get black to play g6.
Yep.
You know, even though I say that, I look at queen c2 again and I'm like, oh, sorry.
Oh.
So this maybe isn't terrible, right? Like if black has to play h6, now that knight can very quickly come in. So maybe it's the
Yep.
more direct approach. Like we're just going to say, hey, we're double attacking that h pawn straight away. Let's see if we can get you to play h6.
Yeah, it's playing with tempo. Then it looks like black just ignored this. He is up a pawn, so we could give one back.
I see queen a3 mentioned in the chat. That's an interesting move too. I like that. Probably forces queen d8. Okay, let's fast forward a little bit. Queen c2, b5 was played, and white does snag the pawn. Bishop back to g6, and now we see knight to e7, kicking out the bishop.
Just rook d1. Because can the queen keep control of d8 now?
It's getting difficult. Queen e6, check, and knight back. Oh, that can't be good though.
No, and then I could even just knight g5 next, or
Oh yeah. Okay, that's a really nice looking move. Rook d1. Do we need knight d5 then? Okay. I think knight e5 here looks good too. Hit the queen, threaten knight f7 check.
yeah. Oh yeah, and then once knight f7 comes, we got queen b3 sliding over, and then we have all those smothered mate patterns.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Bishop h5 was played. Does keep the g6 square open, so I think knight e5 is probably the idea here, or maybe knight g5. Both look pretty good.
Yeah, I think white was just avoiding the knight takes g6 exchange.
You know, one of the things I always talk about is when you have an advantage, think about like risk and reward. So that's part of that's like what type of counterplay does your opponent have, but also maybe like what are the risks of miscalculating. I feel like Mad Luck here is just playing it a bit safe, right? Like he sees the bishop on g6 attack, he drops it back. He's not down any material and his position is still great. Like maybe it's just the safe route and he's trying to conserve a little time. Because it still has to be good for white. Okay, knight e5 looks really juicy.
95, and there's g6, there's f7. Oh yeah, there's
Oh,
that even.
can this be played right away? Maybe black wants to sack? Yeah, I think black has to sack there, right?
King h7, knight g5.
Double check. Take.
Rook h8.
Oh, rook h8. Okay, let's do that again. So check here, rook h8 is mate. Nice. Okay, so rook e8.
That's like a strange sideways back rank mate. Or side rank mate, I guess. I don't know.
They should add that option, 90-degree flip.
Oh, that's bizarre.
You know, I could do it in OBS, I bet. I'm sure I could figure it out.
We be sideways too?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't get my mic to work or speakers, but I can flip a
But
board
we can turn
45
ourselves
degrees.
sideways. We can defy gravity.
Yeah.
Now 95 is also looking extremely good.
Yeah, so 95 was played, hitting the queen. Both of these squares are open. I don't know what black does here, actually, because queen d6, queen d8 both run into the fork. Queen here runs into this fork. Queen here runs into knight g6. I think that's even maybe stronger than rook e8, because with rook e8, there was going to be queen takes, and then grab the bishop. This looks very direct.
Mm.
This looks strong. So Madluck is on Team Boogie, who's down. They're down 1 point. I think this looks like it's going to be a win for Team Boogie, which is going to even the score. So let's go back to the other game. Board number 2. We left it here after queen d7, and white was able to win a pawn.
Oh, yes.
Knight to a6 was played. Okay, what's the idea with knight to a6? Rook takes c3 maybe? Queen takes and then take the knight?
Yeah, it looks all right. So as white, I'd be thinking knight c4. It moves the knight out of the way. It gives our queen battery. It breaks the blockade. Yeah, and then we could push in with e5 next. The
What do you think
queens
of,
are really bad blockaders.
what do you think of knight g4? I just spotted it. Where's the rook takes c? Oh,
Yeah.
No, that can't work, right? Rook takes c3.
Knight takes f6 is check.
Queen takes, and then queen takes c3 in our rook defense. Fortunately, the rook is hitting that bishop as well, or guarding it. This looks really strong to me. If knight h5, black's still alive, but
Is he? Does knight h6 just win?
queen could take.
Oh, the queen's there. Darn queen.
This is so
h5 is
close
a
to a mate,
hilarious
though.
defense.
Yeah, this is so close to a mate. I'm not seeing one.
Oh, at what point do you just play rook e3 then?
Maybe there. So knight g4, knight h5. All of a sudden, there's no tactics on our knight, our e5 knight. Everything is well placed. Maybe there we take the time to play rook e3.
Because then rook h3 is a big threat.
Right.
Probably g3 as well.
Oh, we have suturing time in the chat. That is Boogie, also known as Combinaro. He lost to Presta J on board 1.
Oh, yes, that was the game we spent so much time on, and then an unfortunate mouse slip.
Yeah. I mean, even with the mouse slip, we were discussing that maybe that could be played on a bit. Just because that initiative was really strong for black. There's some good attacking chances, I thought.
Yeah, I think my policy is I don't resign unless my opponent, unless there's no way my opponent could mess it up.
Mm-hmm. So I think it ended right here, and we were looking at bishop takes, bishop c4, allowing this exchange. So I'd been trying to sack the exchange for black most of this game, ever since you had the nice pawn sack. But I thought there was at least a little bit of play here, just because the white king's not quite comfortable yet. We have this pin on d2, the rook lined up, and black has some kind of nice plans coming up that are straightforward, like knight g6, on g4. I think it's a little more difficult for white to play.
Yeah, it's not as if in this position white could just play, c6, c7, then he makes a queen and it's game over, right? There isn't that super obvious next move, and it's possible for an opponent to, especially if white now thinks he's overconfident. Aha, I've won the exchange. Now the game's in the bag. How many games have we lost because we started thinking that way?
Yeah, and there's the psychology behind it too. Like maybe you know your opponent mouse slipped there, right? Like that's not the way you would probably sack the exchange as black, sort of making that waiting move with the rook and then sacking it. So you know your opponent made a slip. And then they keep playing, right? Now you got that psychology on weighing on you where it's like, "Oh, I should win this. I should put it away." But all of a sudden they have nothing to lose and they're just throwing all their pieces at you. And I see Presta J in the chat says, "There were still plenty of ways for me to mess that game up." Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's got to be very likely that white wins, but even like a 5% chance that white doesn't win, I would play it out. Yeah, he
Yeah,
does say
if
bishop c4 was on his radar. All right, should we circle back to this? Where was the attack? Yeah, this was it. Okay, so we just had knight e5 played. Bishop to b7. Okay, there's the queen sack. I don't know about this one.
hmm. But the queen didn't have a square. I suppose you could just take on f4 and then you get 2 pieces for the queen, maybe?
Yeah, but this king looks too exposed on h8.
Yeah.
It's not going to be good. It'd be cool if there was some sort of mating net with bishop and knight, but this king is going to be pretty slippery. He has h1, f1.
Mm.
Rook d8 was played. There's got to be a tactic here because there's a back rank issue too.
Yeah.
Queen takes, rook takes, check. Queen back would pick up the rook. Oh, queen back is
If
mate.
and probably just mate immediately.
Yeah.
They're both good options.
Yeah. Okay, so I think Madluck probably has this one in the bag. And that's Team Boogie. So if Cynical on board 2, if Cynical can win that game from the white side, Team Boogie would make a comeback. Knight d3 was played.
So that seems less passive, more passive than either the knight c4, which I was thinking, or your knight g4. So I guess e5 is still a threat.
And maybe that's the idea. Maybe he wants e5 and he's looking at where to put the knight on the next move, like knight f4, for example.
It's also hard because if you move the knight, it's mate, unless you go to the h5 square. Because we
Right.
don't have a dark squared bishop, we don't have a bishop f8 to help secure that. And the only other way to get out of the fork would be to move the queen, and that would also break the blockade.
Yeah, so if this queen moves, easy for this pawn to move up the board. Again, I feel like this is another one of those positions, and maybe Team Boogie is, strategized, a little pep talk before the matches. White is playing solid in a position where they're in full control and probably completely winning according to the engine, right? Like human level, we're only looking at one pawn difference. The attack could fizzle, but I like engine versus engine. I think White's winning this all day. So maybe Cynical's thinking like, can I play this in a very solid way where I don't mess up on tactics?
Yeah.
But still, like I would think knight c. I mean, okay, so this is not allowing a queen trade offer, I guess. It's kind of trying to shut down the squares for the black pieces.
I don't know. I'm thinking as black, my position is pretty rotten. And so I'm going to want to go all out. So I'm trying to make something like rook takes c3 is got to be a candidate move at some point, with the idea of maybe then trying some sort of knight g4, queen can go to h6 after e5, say. And especially if white is going to push e5, then we don't have that huge wall of pawns in front of our bishop on b7, and the bishop is going to the attack as well. this, I mean, when black wins in style in the semi-Slav, it's this type of thing where there's no white defenders and black is able to throw everything there. But this attack, it works a lot better when there's a dark squared bishop.
I agree with you. So knight c5 was played, and my gut instinct is this helps white based on what we just looked at because that knight was sort of in the way of this bishop.
Mm.
Knight takes c5.
Exchanged very quickly.
Yeah, and the problem for black is they're still down a pawn, right? So not only do you have this passed pawn, there's an extra pawn for white.
Yeah.
And you almost need one of those kind of quick attacking ideas to create some counterplay. But it's not coming easily. Is there any reason to... No, you're still getting mated, sorry.
Yeah, the
I was
mating,
trying
the
to get
mating is the problem, yeah.
Okay, b takes, then the queen. That does get her off the diagonal.
Yep.
So what do we want here? Oh, interesting. There's no queen e3 because knight takes d5. E-pawn's pinned. Maybe queen d2 trying to come this way. So I think this is what black wants. I think black wants to create blockades on all of these dark squares, and the way that he's going to try to get it is queen back, knight g4, threatening mate. White defends the mate, and then maybe knight e5. Because if this c3 bishop trades for this knight, white is left with a bad bishop. It's on the same color as these pawns. But I still like white there. That's the problem, and pieces are coming off.
So perhaps then queen to d1. Oh, that I was thinking queen d1 because it ignores the it defends everything, so there's no knight takes d5 or nonsense or whatever. But more importantly, it just stops knight g4 on its tracks.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can imagine f4, queen f3, or some sort of slow play that way. But we got queen d3 on the board.
And I guess queen d1 works both ways because even though we're stopping the knight, the knight stops our queen in a way from the white side. If the queen can't come out this way. I'm going to flip the board and look at it from white side again. Where does white want the queen? h3? Well, this will be instructive. What are your thoughts on a queen trade? Let's say white plays queen g3 and black just takes. Does white want that trade? Or who does it benefit?
Well, we've got two bishops, an extra pawn, and black's really looking for some counterplay. I mean, especially now. Oh, h3. Okay. I thought with queen g3, it's also threatening mate on the g7, so it almost forces the trade here.
Yeah.
Now white played queen h3 very quickly. So I'm guessing white is still in let's attack mode. Let's finish this off. And I can see that just because the bishops are so menacing. I think you were talking with in one of your YouTube videos with Bob, how there's a time in when you need to shift gears mentally into conversion mode.
Mm-hmm.
I think after queen g3, nothing bad can happen to white.
I agree. And I think you're right. The pawn's coming up the board, the bishop's on great diagonals, nothing's closed up. Rooks are behind the pawns. It feels very low risk for white, playing queen g3. But there's also kind of this factor where black's king seems in more danger than white's still. Like black is now trying to get a little counterplay, but maybe Cynical just feels this is a quicker way to play the game. All right, that's slightly uncomfortable though. How do we guard f2? Unless it's queen back to queen g3 now. Because the queen hits this rook.
Yeah.
So there's no like rook e2. Well, also rook e2, there could be bishop takes pawn.
It's funny how these tactics can appear in such small positions, right? Like white's doing so well, and it looks like everything's in hand, and you've got all the advantages, and then it just takes one little slip.
Yeah.
It's chess is a cruel game that way.
And it's interesting because like queen f4, it just feels like a very small prodding move. Like there's
Hmm.
only one threat, and it's a simple threat. It's queen takes f2. But then the more you look at it, it's like white has to make a concession to be able to defend against that threat. And maybe queen g3 is best, just admitting a small mistake on the last move and saying, yeah, I'd rather go for the queen trade now.
I'm also just practically, he's got 5 minutes on the clock, white does.
Oh, yeah. Good
And
point.
so trade the queens, low risk. Let's play a simple endgame where we have all the advantages. And he decides not to. Okay.
So I'm trying to recall a few of my simul games against Cynical. I feel like he is known for playing a tactical style. He might actually be more comfortable creating sort of this dynamic position, using the queen and two bishops to attack the black king, instead of like going into an endgame where he has to grind it out. But I agree with you that the time's a factor now too. I didn't notice that 5 minutes on the clock. So where does black put the knight?
Yeah, it'd be nice if he was attacking with more than two pieces. I'm trying to, like, does bishop a6 do anything? Not really. Can we swing the rook in? It's really hard to bring the rook in. Something like f5 doesn't make sense. So it looks like the knight needs to move.
Oh, but then there's e5
Mm.
and the h7 pawn's in trouble.
So knight e5 instead.
It's funny, I wish the arrow went the other way.
It's like, no,
I was trying to
you don't see
redo
the
it.
queen there.
Yeah. Okay, so knight e5. What does white do here? I do like that the knight e5, the knight attacks f3. Because I've been
Yeah,
looking at some lines where maybe white plays g3, sacks this pawn, but the queen is
yeah.
almost trapped, and white gets a stronger attack.
And if black can get one tempo to play f6 and cement the knight, and it stops the mate threats on g7, and the pawn on e4 means the bishop on b1 isn't attacking yet.
Right. Blockade that guy. Don't let the d
Yeah,
pawn move. And then black is slowly starting to get what he wants in terms of blockading all the dark squares
yeah.
and making that bishop look bad on b1. Because one thing white has to think about here, like let's say knight e5, and I know this is giving black a couple moves, but if rook d8 gets played, there's already ideas of bishop c8 hitting the queen, and rook d6 finally getting another piece back into the game.
Mm.
I don't know if rook d6 would work well with f6, but if black wanted to play in a way where like, okay, maybe they sack another pawn, but they're getting a ton of activity against the white queen, that could be worth it for black.
That'd be an interesting psychological decision to suddenly start attacking, especially when you know your opponent is low on time,
Hmm.
especially when your opponent has been thinking their position has been really, really good. And as we see, knight e5 played. And it looks like the second game has completed as well. Is that what I see?
Yes, so it looks like Mad Luck won this one. I'll update the scoreboard. We're at a tie now, 1.5 to 1.5. And let's see how this one finished. There was knight takes queen, knight takes bish, queen takes f5, rook d8, and rook e8 check was played.
Just
Black
trading it
resigned.
off.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point to resign. It's a queen for a knight, and it's going to be a checkmate very soon.
Yeah. I think the main story of that game, the strong center and the pieces were just
Yeah, I think it's piece placement in this one. Like it kind of converted from the There was the big center here,
Yep.
and then white did lose a pawn, but that activity of his pieces, like everything was well placed. Black
Yeah, you
just
look at,
never got this king side or queen side developed.
yeah. If he had a chance to play some sort of bishop e6 really fast, get the rook over to b8, right? So even right here, well, I guess it was hard because if you play bishop e6, b7 falls.
But yeah, it's
No.
somewhere around this moment, I think black had to figure out how can I get that bishop out quickly.
Now black is up a pawn, right?
Yes, you're
Because
right.
white sacrificed it.
Maybe
And
bishop
so,
g4.
yeah, this is one of the things that really, really helped me become a stronger player is when I stopped giving myself permission to give back material. You read about it all the time in the chess books. It's like you can give back the pawn, but I never did it. No, that
Yeah.
my pawn is my precious. And once I was able to do that mental shift in my head, I'm up a pawn, so it's okay to give one back. And then you, instead of defending passively, you get a normal position. I'm not sure if bishop g4 is perfect here, but at least thinking that way really, really helped me.
I think you're right. And it's something that all chess players kind of go through this progression where in the beginning we're taught certain rules in chess. And like the very first thing we're taught is to count the points. Like we know what pawn is
Yeah.
1 point and knight is 3 points. And I
And
think it takes a lot of work to rewire our brains to actually think like, hey, I can give a pawn back if I'm connecting my rooks and attacking my opponent's king. Or one that actually took me a really long time to appreciate was the exchange sack. I would never consider exchange sacks because I'm like, that's 2 points. Why would I trade a rook for a bishop? And once I started to appreciate them, like there's a ton of situations where an exchange sack will give a lot of dynamic play in the middle game for the side losing 2 points. And I think
yeah,
this is one of those cases where you want to go outside the box. You want to think outside the box. Like we don't care about that one extra pawn. We need to find a way to get our rooks connected and make sure that this king doesn't get checkmated.
yeah, yeah. It's especially true because when you're brand new to chess, how do you win? Usually it's not because of checkmate. It's because you've won more stuff than the other guy, right? You
Yeah.
won all his pawns and then you were able to make a queen and you build your whole, your chess skill. It's built off that foundation. So you're right. It's hard to do it, but that also is what makes it so powerful is once you can do that, that's when the next levels start opening up.
And another thing that I like to do too, that we talk about a lot at Chess Goals, I like to track takeaways, whether it's on a spreadsheet, a piece of paper, or even just mentally can be enough for some people. Um, when I was recently making a push at trying to improve my blitz, one thing I noticed is I don't develop enough. And it sounds so simple, right? We all know to develop our pieces, but it was exactly positions like this, where black needs to have a development first mindset. Like you really got to figure out how do I just get that last bishop out and get that rook on a8 just right back into the game. Like there's got to be a little bit of urgency on getting pieces developed in a position that's wide open like this. If it's completely
Yeah.
closed, sometimes you can get away with it. But I think that's something where, Squid can take a look at this game and say, okay, it kind of came down to development, and that's the main takeaway here.
Yeah. A6 was just a slow move. It's when the other side is fully developed.
Yeah. All right, now let's go to the last game. So we have a tied match, 1.5 to 1.5. I
Ooh.
stopped rigging the scoreboard. We have Cynical on Team Boogie and C-Pank on Team Presta J.
All right. So,
We had Queen F4 played F3. We looked at this point, knight E5,
yeah.
Rook D1, and now C4 from black. What's the idea with C4?
I guess he wants to anchor in knight to D3, but white controls it more. This is a common idea in certain Benoni structures, I know. But it's hard because, again, there's no dark square bishop. Like, yeah, if there were a bishop on that diagonal, that would make a lot of sense. As is, it just seems to, if we play bishop A6 now, the bishop now doesn't have a diagonal anymore. So not, I don't merely see the idea unless, any ideas, Matt?
It almost looks like a complex waiting move to me. So the
Okay.
idea is if the c3 bishop ever moves, black plays c3. It's kind of like passing the move to white, but there's that little annoyance of I got to be careful, right? You move this bishop, or if it trades off, okay, now all of a sudden c3 c2 is coming that much quicker.
Okay.
So now it's on white to make a little bit of progress, I guess.
So besides just playing queen g3 and playing, the end game. Again, I'm saying this, I'm not even a huge fan of playing end games, but when it's easy, to me, can white just play d6, threaten d7? Force the rooks to like a rook to move over.
Yeah, these pawns are so solid, and d7's coming on the next move. You're right.
And then whichever rook moves over, the bishop can slide up to a5. Right? And so the queen controls d7, the bishop can control a5, the rook is pushing it. So
I was getting caught looking for a queen trap. That's why I was slow on the arrows. I was like, oh, maybe there's a way to trap that queen here too. And she's running back through f6. G3, does that do anything to trap her? Probably not. Yeah, it's too crazy, I think. This has to be the critical line. D6, there's no knight D7 because the queen's on it. And rook D8, like you said, bishop A5. Okay, going after the queen. Queen F6 is pretty
okay.
much forced. But now C4 is looking like a better move, right? Like let's say Queen F6 and C3 wants to come next, followed by
Right.
C2 fork.
And if the bishop moves back to c3, you could even just go right back. Oh, is white going for a draw?
With a tied match? Okay, Presta J. Are you the captain, Presta J? What's going on here? You know what this reminds me of? The NFL. You notice how all these games are like tied all of a sudden? A little suspicious.
It is a little suspicious.
Armageddon tiebreaker. That's
Team captains played out. All right. Uh,
yeah, look
no,
at
I
this.
keep.
The captains are in the chat. Armageddon tiebreaker and haha, oh no. Haha, oh no. Oh, need to
Very
keep the
suspicious.
viewers need to keep the viewers excited. Are you reading the chat too?
No, I don't have enough screens to have that.
Krista J said, need to keep the viewers excited and bring in those advertising dollars.
Oh. So to me, this is fantastic that black is the one who's saying, no, I don't want to draw in this position.
I think white was actually trying to buy a little time there. Because if you look at the
Yeah.
clock, 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Why wouldn't black repeat? So black is saying that there's an improvement here. F4. Okay, so F4 opens up this diagonal, but there's currently bishop block.
Yeah. I'm thinking knight d3. Oh, I guess the queen also controls that square. That's the
So knight d3, bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes.
because I noticed when the queen moved to a6, it's now x-raying through the pawn, but by playing f4, the queen now controls that square as well.
I do think white has to be pretty careful here, though, because if knight d3 works tactically, it's a really nice idea to put pressure on white with 2 minutes on the clock.
Yep.
Like even in this line, this is going to be deep, but pawn takes. Sorry, so knight d3, bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes, rook takes. There could be some cases where maybe there's like a bishop takes pawn in the end and it works.
Yep.
Right? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, white's up one pawn
Yeah.
in a rook and pawn endgame with drawing chances for black.
Yeah. Or there might have been an f5 there in the last line that you're looking at, because If the rook's on d3, then the rook on e1, that's right. If the pawn moves, then d5 might hang.
Yeah, so will we see a situation where white regrets not trading queens earlier? I think white's still definitely in the driver's seat, right?
Yeah.
There's these mate threats, option to push whichever pawn. But the king's a little more exposed too. You gotta be careful.
So the idea I'm assuming is going to be f5, or maybe even just h4, h5. Because by
Like,
playing f5, you give the e5 square to blockade.
yeah, that was like the first move that came to mind, h5, but I'm not sure if it achieves enough for black, right? This takes 2 moves and does it help black? I'm not sure. Like maybe it weakens the king side a bit for black. But I do want to play actively. I don't think black can afford to just sit and wait. Okay, how do we get the queen to pressure the dark squares? Because I feel like that's where white is vulnerable here.
Yeah.
Like queen d6, tempting. If e5, we
No,
can
I just
check.
keep looking at that bishop b7, and it's in the way. If it was on any other square, say c7, or
Yeah,
it's the wrong piece right now.
yeah, if f5 somehow could work, that type of move is what black needs.
Yeah.
Or encouraging e5. I mean, how bad is it to play a move like queen d6 with the sole purpose of trying to bait white into playing e5 and then move the queen out of the way and claim that it's worth it because that bishop is getting some play? Oh, wow. Look at this comment from the chat. Bishop a1, queen c3 would be entertaining. Wow, using the long diagonal. Bishop a1, queen c3, threatening mate.
Yeah, I'm thinking black's going to need to play f6 at some point.
Yeah.
Or if he goes with the f5 plan, then a rook on the 7th rank could defend laterally.
So would you consider f6 right here? If e5, hmm,
I don't know. It seems black has gotten this far and he's made the position a mess because he hasn't played the passive moves like f6.
mm-hmm.
And so if I couldn't see anything else, I might play f6. Even your idea of queen d6 provoking e5 is the type of tricky type move that I would consider. It's hard. Both people are very low on time. It's going to turn into a blitz game soon.
Yeah. Oh, there's one. Uh-oh. C-Pank is offline with a tied match in 4 minutes on the clock. This is the Wi-Fi gambit.
Oh, I'd be looking at the team captains right now and see if one of them has wire cutters or.
Rest of J, does he have like 5G internet backup or something? So maybe H5 is the aggressive way to play it. I know I kind of said it weakened the black king side, but I'm thinking if we gave white a move or two, H4, H5 is an idea as well.
Yeah, that was my original idea for white. If black does nothing, I mean, you could play f5, but then the knight comes to e5. And so playing h4 to h5 instead forces the knight to not blockade the diagonal.
Mm-hmm. So I think the issue for black right now is even though he's fighting for counterplay, a lot of the pieces individually aren't doing a lot for counterplay. Like all 3 of these pieces, I think you could argue are just sort of waiting to get into the game.
Yeah.
And really only this knight is creating some potential counterplay. Like we have f4, knight e5 potentially if the pawn moves.
Yeah. Black also declined repetition of moves to get here, which is an interesting.
Yeah. To get the queen over to a6, they decline the repetition. I wonder if they spotted a queen trap, like g3 or something crazy.
Mm,
No, it doesn't work. That can't work.
no, as soon as there's a g3, then a knight takes f3 could come because the bishop on c3 is hanging.
Right.
So by not playing g3, knight takes f3 doesn't work because of queen takes f3 covering the bishop.
So he's still offline. Mad Luck in the chat says, "Oh no, my internet." Little trash talk from the other team there. And then Suturing Time, also from Team Boogie, says, "Wi-Fi jammer protocol initiated." That was not in the rules. Like nothing said you can't try to jam your opponent's Wi-Fi.
Right.
Maybe for the
Oh,
next iteration.
this truly is like the NFL now. We're coming down to the final 2 minutes. We're out of timeouts.
Right.
That's about the extent of my NFL knowledge, but
Oh, there it is.
oh,
That's a sad way to see it end. I'm not sure why. Some weird chess.com thing. Oh, there we is that gonna do it? Trying to get the engine on so we have a peek.
yeah. Oh.
Hmm.
I'd be more interested in the.
Here we go. Yeah, we can check the other one too.
The position around the repetition. Yeah.
We got a 2.5 for white.
Yeah.
Stockfish doesn't show in the chat, but it looks like there's 3 queen moves that are all pretty close, like 2.5 to 3-point range. Queen a6 is not in the top 3, so how does queen a6 look? It takes it to about a 3.9 advantage. So black did lose a little bit there, lost a little over a pawn, close to a pawn and a half.
Yeah.
So it looks like, yeah, maybe repeating would be a good option. Oh, but that wasn't one of the top 3 either. Queen g5, it looks a little stronger. Like, this is a hard position to play for white with 2 minutes on the clock.
See, that was.
How do you make
I think
progress?
by going back to queen f4 and at least offering repetition, it's forcing white to think of something else. Now maybe white just plays d6 like I was thinking, and he actually finds the winning moves or what have you. But at least he has to do something. I feel.
And that's the top move. d6 was the top move. I see in the chat, Presta J said, "Well played, Jeff." So Jeff is cynical, and cynical said, "Thanks." 2-minute stoppage. So, okay, so in the very end position, though, what did we have? It was queen b6, king h1. What was played here? Knight g6. Queen g3. I believe this was the end position. We're at a 4.5 pawn advantage.
I think the queen was on a6, but yeah.
You're right, I'm sorry. Queen a6. Queen g3. Was it this?
I think it was f4, knight g6, and then queen g3. Because f4 provoked the knight, and then he went back over to threaten the mate. And then we were trying to think, what does black do? And I guess we'll never find out.
Yeah, so this is +5. e5 is coming. Like if queen d6, e5 right away. If f6, e5 is also good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good game. Jeff, you did a nice job playing dynamically.
Now I'm curious. I'm very curious. Does the computer recommend a queen trade?
I knew you were gonna say that. So we were thinking here queen G3, go for the queen trade. Um, actually, so queen G3 and queen H3 are 3.5 pawn advantage. Pawn to E5
E5,
was the
yeah.
best. That wasn't on my
Oh,
radar.
yeah, that's
If queen H6, now queen G3, and these pawns are monsters. Okay, so what happens if black takes? Knight hangs.
okay.
And the knight doesn't have any good squares, so that knight's actually trapped. Wow, that's deep. E5, and the idea is we're
Yeah.
hitting this pawn, but we have the plan of trapping the knight.
But we were saying at that point that black couldn't just sit there and do nothing. He had to find this complications. And it seemed as if black certainly made white work more than if you were just sitting there and doing nothing.
Yeah, and I think it was a position where as long as you felt you were confident that black couldn't get enough counterplay, keeping the queens on makes sense because at the time the black king was in more danger.
Yeah.
But I think in my mind I was a little afraid of the clock too. Even though there was 6 minutes here, I was like, okay, the clock is getting a little bit low. Are we creating some unnecessary risks? But it actually worked out great for white. You know, he did a good job holding the position. I want to see. Oh, it's not going to be super easy to pull up, is it? Let me check one thing. How do we? Let's see. How do we find that other game that ended? Press to J. Yep, here we go. I got
All
it.
right.
Okay, so we had this position with the mouse slip. This is the one I wanted to
Right.
see. So here we are looking at a 3.5 pawn advantage for white. Bishop takes c6, and I wanted to look at bishop c4. You know, computer likes b3 though, and that was something that I kind of thought of later. Like moused over it, I was like, oh, maybe b3. Because once white plays b3, if that bishop has to retreat or just take the knight, now I do think white's doing fine.
Oh, by playing it before we take on e8. Yeah, because I was always looking at some sort of bishop. I guess even here, the rook is undefended, and so there's no good bishop e7 discovery.
Right. Yeah, like this doesn't help you. I mean, this just gets captured.
Mm.
Okay. The best move for black is actually knight g6. Try to bring the knight into the game. And maybe this would still be worth playing out for black. You know, because I think bishop c4 is refuted pretty nicely
Yeah,
by b3.
it's not the simplest +3 position I've ever seen. That's for sure.
Yeah. Let's see. Suturing Time says earlier there were positional discovery setups with bishop takes c5, but it was always one move short. Yeah. Well, let's look at this, where the pawn sack happened. The computer actually says knight to b6, and the position is equal.
And it doesn't even take the pawn.
Because after this, knight d5, double attack. Okay, so let's say white's, oh, I guess, okay, let's say white's greedy. Bishop g4.
Knight g3.
Wow. It's that Tartakower stealth attack, you know, like the F pawn's just coming at you and your king's still on E1.
Wow.
Yeah, we both really liked this idea. Knight F8, sacking the pawn, and just creating a ton of play. So knight G3 was still good. F5, knight E2 was a good move. F4, bishop D2 was top move. Bishop G4, top move. And you guys were playing top moves this whole way through.
Very suspicious.
Yeah, very
No,
suspiciously strong.
yeah, this is great.
Bishop
Bishop B.
E1. Yep. Queen H5. So the cool thing was you guys were both playing a very high quality game, and it's this very interesting position because we got a, you know, somewhere between half a pawn and 1 pawn advantage for white, even though they're up a pawn of material. So black is always kind of getting at least a little bit of comp for that pawn. Looks like G5 was the first move in the last 7 where someone didn't play it. Something tied for the tops.
Mhm.
Knight E6 was a little stronger with the idea of doubling rooks.
That makes sense because white cannot double rooks.
So the hard thing with that is like you're down a pawn, you feel like there's some urgency to attack.
Yeah,
But Stockfish is saying, let's put the brakes on a little bit and just strengthen all of the pieces. Let's bring that A8 rook into the attack. I like that. Resta J is saying, I've only studied the Tartakower as white because all the ChessGoals members play it now. Smart. Very smart.
no,
I'm going to have some new videos coming out on the hillbilly attack. You know that one, Jonathan?
that's Simon Williams, Bishop C4 and Bishop B3 and Queen H5, right?
Yeah. It's actually pretty dangerous for black. Like, I've been looking at some of the lines, and at least in like club level play, looking at the Lichess databases, black goes wrong quite often. So I'm going to do like a little mini series, I think, on the hillbilly.
Yeah. It's not just that. It's like in Blitz, white can play the standard easy thematic moves.
Yes.
And if you've never seen it before, it's very easy to go, whoops.
Oh
no, my king.
Yeah, exactly what I was going to say. That's right. And then Mad Luck is saying, agreed. I stayed away from the ChessGoals Nimzo as I didn't know if Squid had that course. This is like a lot of meta with the who has which course. And speaking of opening courses, check out the link in the description below. We have a SmithyQ chessable course. It's a really good one and it's free. So go check that out.
Yeah, it's a couple years old at this point, but for opening fundamentals, I imagine it still has everything you need.
Yeah, that's a really cool course. And then Suturing Time says, yeah, I was so angry after I didn't play H5 that I panicked a bit. I thought you handled it well. I mean, you didn't make any mistakes for a long stretch after H5. You played really well.
Yeah, it was a fascinating game. Shame at the ending.
Yeah. Does anyone have any so we have 7 viewers still watching. Does anyone have any questions before we wrap up? We're kind of closing in on the 2-hour mark. Here's a question for you, SmithyQ. Why do I have cardboard laying against the window? It doesn't actually show on stream though.
You have cardboard in the window?
You see it over here.
Let's see.
This window is super bright and it faces south. So, and then there's snow on the ground. So the whole window just like blasters me with light. So I have cardboard blocking it.
Okay.
Professional studio.
Very, very nice. That's
yeah.
okay.
All right. No questions, it looks like. Suturing Time says, appreciate the stream, guys. Yeah, Jonathan, I'm really glad you joined me again. This was awesome.
Yeah, this is a very fast way to spend 2 hours.
Yeah. I really enjoy it. And I feel like I always learn something too. Like it's just seeing how different players think, hearing your thoughts. It's really instructive.
Yeah, it's nice to have Matt here, just making sure that I'm not blundering all sorts of things. I like to think in terms of ideas and general stuff, and then Matt can be here to go, all right, but doesn't that drop mate in one? Like, oh yeah, that's right. So let's
keep each other in check.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. One last comment. Christina says in the chat, where's Matt with a ghost emoji? I think she's saying I think she's saying I blend in with the white background or something. Too blinding.
We need to get that thumbnail guy up.
Yeah.
Who's that? JJ Creates, right?
Yeah, JJ Creates.
There we go. Thumbnail next video. Here we go.
Get the ghost going.
Yeah, you can do it for the Halloween Gambit or something.
Yeah, I like it. All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching. Thanks again, Jonathan. This was a lot of fun. Make
Thanks
sure
for
to
having me, Matt.
check out Jonathan's course on your way out. All right. Have a good day, everyone. We'll see ya.
Take care.